Now, though, it is time to get some legal news, find out what's going on with the law with Eborn's greatest writs. And Andrew Eborn, futurist, barrister and broadcaster, joins me now. Andrew.
Hello, Petrie. It's always a delight to join you. I loved hearing about the Floody Mary. I thought that'd be early breakfast, but I misunderstood. I looked at her website. Fantastic stuff. Good advice. I would absolutely recommend
Yeah,
it.
I know. I mean, she does all of this for free. I mean, she's just this brilliant woman who wants to help people because she's been through it all. I think it's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary.
Let's turn to some news. And the big news today really is Suella Braverman having a chat with Mark Rowley about the Met Police, and they should be using the full force of the law against jihad-chanting protesters.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's incredibly tragic. And we always sort of talk about reporting the news without fear or favour. And everybody's very concerned about how they might use particular language that might inflame the situation. And I think it's important to point out that in these times of pain and terror, the notion that there are laws that we must all live by is indeed challenging but essential. And I think there's a couple of things that we should talk about. Is obviously the laws of war aim to ensure that when conflict is necessary, there are limits on what harm can be done to other human beings. And there's all sorts of things. It's a very good article which is written in the Financial Times by the former president of the UK Supreme Court, Lord Neuberger, and others, Sandra Fredman from the University of Oxford, and so on and so forth. And they talk about that basically you've got to look at what these relevant rules and regulations are. For example, the murder of hundreds of civilians in cold blood and a range of other atrocities are, without doubt, crimes against humanity. You also look at conducting any armed conflict, no matter what provocation, is bound in law to comply with all the laws of war. And basically, you need to sort of understand that there's a complete prohibition, for example, the use of force in exchange for rules protecting basic humanity.
And general punishment.
However,
one of the biggest ones is general punishment. So the innocent should not be punished on behalf of the guilty, basically.
Absolutely. And if you're some aspects, for example, already caused significant concern of international law forbids seizures of civilian populations and so on and so forth. So we need to look at that. And collective punishment, as you rightly say, is prohibited by the laws of war. It is horrendous. And I always say that one of the first casualties in war is indeed the truth, and what goes on in the reporting that we see has been pretty appalling. I'll give you one example, is that there were 50 million posts on Twitter, now X, on the Monday following the Gaza, what's the best way of putting it, the Gaza action, let me put it that way. And a lot of those were false. And you
mean the terrorist attack upon innocent
There
kids.
You go. I think that's the way we don't dance around it. So the reality is that we need to sort of look at this sort of thing, cut to the chase, and say, look, these actions are inexcusable. The question, as you rightly point out, is what's being done over here. You have protests on the streets of London, and the prejudice that we've seen basically online, and the poison that there's been online, has spilled out onto the streets of London. I live very close to the BBC, as you know, and we have a community which have wonderful, the Jews, and we have Israel, people from Israel. We have the biggest mosque, all within walking distance, and have lived very happily together for a very, very long time. What this has done is basically stirred up those deep-seated resentments, if you like, and there's these massive sort of conflicts. And a number of these sort of things, well, what are the police doing about it? There's all sorts of incendiary language being used. And basically, Sir Mark Rowley, he's facing criticism over the way chants of jihad were dealt with. He has
they weren't dealt with, were they? That was the issue. They weren't dealt with. The police stood by and allowed people in some views, to incite jihad in terms of violence, not in terms of religious self-reflection.
And it's absolutely wrong, isn't it? You have to work on this basis. Absolutely, everybody's entitled to sort of put their point of view, but at the same time,
inciting to violence is illegal.
It is not. It's illegal, and you absolutely have to call it out. And I think enough is enough. We need to turn around and say more needs to be done to stop this poison.
What is the law, Andrew? If you are, I mean, I know the police are seeking these young women with images of paratroopers on their on their shoulders as well, paragliders, because that's how these terrorists got into these areas in order to kill those young people. So, you know, what are the laws? How far can you go if you're at a protest and you feel very passionately, as people do, both sides of this argument? What are the laws that constrain you?
Well, I think if there's any incitement to commit any crime or hatred and so on, so that's against the law. And strong
or support
action
of a terrorist group, prescribed terrorist group.
Exactly. And I think talking about people want peace, I get it, I understand, and people mustn't make the mistake of thinking that all Palestinians are Hamas, because they're not.
No.
And I think at the end of these stories, you and I have spoken about this beforehand, there are people involved. And I think as soon as you start personifying the atrocities that are going on, that's the time it really brings it into perspective. And I find it absolutely appalling. As I say, around the corner from the BBC, you see it splattered with red paint. There's a couple of Jewish schools here in North London where people are living in absolute fear about what's going to happen as a result of this incitement, if you like, and this stirring up of horrendous hatred.
But I don't understand why human beings don't understand that violence begets violence. I don't get it. I've never understood it. It is the most ridiculous thing ever that we have not progressed above that. And you've got people calling for violence on the streets as somehow a solution to violence that's happening in Gaza.
No, and it is despicable. And the concern is this as well, Petrie, is that we're a little bit scared about the language you use. I mean, the BBC was scared about the language it's used.
Well, it shouldn't be. It's ridiculous. It's a legally prescribed terrorist group. I mean, you know, they call ISIS. They call ISIS terrorists.
And you're so right. So what they are.
Oh, we
injected and so on. But I'm with you on this, Petrie. It's really simple. The fact that we're scared about the language used because we don't want to stir it up any further than it's already stirred up, but at the same time call it out, because enough already. And I think we need to realise people on both sides are hurting on this sort of thing.
Nobody's going to win
which
here.
We need to cut out.
Nobody wins, and that is the worst thing about war. There's never been a war, really, where anybody has particularly won in terms of, I suppose the Second World War, at the end of that, we won getting the Nazis out. But that, you know, the cost of that as well, absolutely extraordinary. And the Nazis, trying to rise again, it's all very terrifying at the moment.
No, it's absolutely horrendous.
Awful. And I just don't get it. Why have human beings gone this far and not suddenly had that moment of clarity?
And we always say history repeats itself, and I can tell you why, is because we don't learn the lessons from history, and that's the problem. But there are laws of war, and I would absolutely insist that people understand that as well.
Absolutely there are. That's the problem, isn't it, as well, is that terrorist groups tend to not follow the rules of war because they don't have to. States do. There lies the difference.
No, and the laws of war are not pacifist. They're the opposite. They're an admission that there are occasions when war is necessary, but they basically set those rules, and those rules need to be followed.
Yeah. Authors sue Meta, Microsoft, Bloomberg in AI copyright clash. This is going to keep going on and on, isn't it?
I've just come back from Cannes, as I do the drama awards down there, and as you know, I speak around the world as a wonderful advocate for artificial intelligence. But there are two big issues. It's what you put in to get the content in the first place, and then what you put out and how that's used. So what it is, a group of writers, and they include the former Arkansas governor Mick Huckabee and the best-selling Christian author Lisa TerKeurst, I think her name is. They filed a lawsuit in New York, and it accuses Meta, formerly Facebook, and Microsoft and Bloomberg of using their work to train artificial intelligence systems. And it is that simple. If you're using somebody else's copyright work, then basically you need a license. If you do it without their consent, then it's an infringement of those rights. And this is rumbling on, if you like, because these wonderful systems need to be fed on something. And if you're feeding on somebody else's property, which is intellectual property, copyright and so on and so forth, then that's an infringement of rights unless it's done in the appropriate way.
But, you've got several stories here about copyright. This is going to be the biggest legal issue, isn't it, for anybody who originates any form of art, writing, photography, right. Music, any of those people, of which there are millions, have got to be very careful about their own copyright.
Well, you're absolutely right. And what I love, I always use this opportunity to praise you as an artist, because I've seen your glorious work, and I would encourage more people to do so. What I would say is that as an artist, as a creator, you have a bundle of rights, which gives you effectively the exclusive rights to determine what happens to your work. And it's simply not just about sort of written work, but music, and we call it bad vibrations, music publishers suing Anthropic AI for using copyrighted lyrics. You can't always scrape what you want was the terrible headline in one particular. I know.
But is copyright immediately inferred, like on a piece of work that I might do? Is copyright immediate, or do I have to go through the process of copywriting?
The great thing, I know this is again an opportunity to explain how it works, is it is automatic. In this country in particular, it is automatically given. As soon as you create a work, you get copyright in it. So if you write a little shopping list and you write a little note to somebody reminding them to pick those up, there is copyright in that. The little dawdles that you do when you're scribbling around, there is copyright in that as an artistic work. The value of it depends on the commercial reality, but it is automatic. And so every one of your glorious members of the audience around the world, the zillions, are all copyright owners. And that's the wonderful thing about it. And the other thing is, what's going to happen is, we're talking now about images and about voices and how that can replicate things. You'll know that some of the biggest disputes at the moment in the entertainment business, we've had the writers' strike who are concerned about AI, which has just been sorted. We had the actors' strike, which is front and centre of the whole sort of issue is about AI and how you can do a recording of just one day, and you can basically get their name, image, likeness, sound, and so on and so forth, and use it forever. And one of the things that I was talking about in Cannes with the various people there is exactly that. You don't need to have any actors. You don't need to have any writers anymore, because we can all do a pretty good job without them. And this is the problem. So what we're going to try and do is work out a mechanism so that you can reward people properly. I often give the example of Bruce Willis, who has aphasia and so can no longer act in that way. But he licensed his name, image, and so on and so forth to a Russian telecom company for millions of dollars in order to work on that sort of basis. And they created an AI version of him. And we had similar sort of things where you had, Darth Vader, and you had the voice replicated with AI and so on and so forth. So we need to look at the economic value of that. But also the danger of it is what they call the bad actors, and how this is being used in a terrible way, where voice in particular, there are lots of scams going on where you can replicate somebody's voice and you are fooled into thinking you're dealing with the real person. And that's a very, very difficult issue. You're going to find lots of fraud cases where people phone up, you think it's a long-lost relative who's in distress, it sounds like them, and so on and so forth.
That is terrifying, isn't it? We've got to have code words. It is terrifying,
isn't it?
We're going to have to take code words now. Andrew, we've run out of time, I'm afraid.
Good heavens, okay.
I know, it's gone quickly. Andrew Eborn, futurist, barrister and broadcaster, thank you very much indeed.
On the app, on your mobile, Talk Radio and Talk TV.